Hi, I'm Melissa Valdez, Director of Client Experience for SBI. Our guest on today's podcast is Steve Grimshaw, the Chief Executive Officer for Caliber Collision. Steve joined us in person at the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas. Steve has built an incredible business through both organic and inorganic growth. He's here today to demonstrate how a CEO orchestrates the right level of inorganic growth to maximize the valuation of your company. You don't want to miss this one. From SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas, the most watched and listened to content in B2B sales and marketing, it's the SBI Podcast with your host, Matt Shares.
All right, you're listening to the SBI Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Shares, and today's guest is Steve Grimshaw, and Steve is the CEO for Caliber Collision. Today, Steve and I are chatting about how you orchestrate the right level of organic versus inorganic growth to maximize the valuation of your company. We're going to jump back into the questions here. So, Steve, as the inorganic motion changed and you built muscle and you learned what it was you needed to do, how did you think about internal resourcing of your team? Because as you and I know from all the time we both spent in private equity, due diligence, right? Mm-hmm. This widely used term. I mean, a CEO has to do great diligence when they're going to do an acquisition, whether it's a $5 million tuck-in or it's a $500 million. I mean, you got to know what it is you're picking up. So I would have to think that as the company has scaled, you've been working on building inorganic analytical muscle. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So, one of the biggest mistakes I actually see CEOs and companies make is they don't build the foundation for growth in advance of it happening. And you see this a lot by financial sponsors that basically, hey, show it to me and then I'll let you do this. And that's ass backwards with all due respect. Yep. We've had great owners, so we were able to spend a lot of time and invest a tremendous amount of money that we built an operating platform that we knew was scalable and we knew that was effective. Yep. Number two is we built an IT platform that we knew that we could integrate all the systems and processes and it was scalable as well, and it's obviously cloud-based today. Yep. And at the same time, we were investing a tremendous amount of money in the people, especially on the leadership side. Yep. People underestimate how important it is to have these inspirational leaders that are bought into your culture to go into these new territories and these new areas to really lead and drive change. So with those pieces and foundations, what we started to do, to your point, is we've got a very deep bench. So we've got an acquisition team, we've got an integration team, we've got an FP&A team, we have a facilities team. We have many resources that are dedicated to acquisitions today. Yep. We have third-party developers we use. One of the third-party developers who was one of the first ones we used, you feel like they work for us, quite frankly, because they're such a great partner. And they're the ones that actually, collectively, we built the site selection competency together. Yep. And they actually bought the firm and integrated it as part of their offering at their group today. Mm-hmm. So over time, what takes place is you need the resources. A lot of those will be external and third party at first. Yep. Over time, you'll figure it out, up to and including legal and others, what you need to bring in, because you've got to have the internal intellectual capacity to be able to manage these things and scale these things, and that's the balancing act. The more you leave to a third party, right, you're not creating those core competencies internally, right, and you're actually limiting your growth to some extent. So it's the balancing act of what do I bring in, when do I bring in, but in all cases, bring it in prior to the growth occurring.
And so Steve and I have had the good fortune of working together. Steve's hired us twice. He hired us at Safety Clean, similar sort of, build something, train my team, coach my team, and then get out. But what was interesting about when Steve hired us at Caliber was relative to the size that you were and the EBITDA that you were throwing off, you spent a lot of money with our firm. And what I love about how you did that is it's been a long time since we've done an engagement, God's honest truth, and because you were focused on long term.
Right.
So you said, I'm going to build a platform. I'm going to build muscle. I'm going to build a key account program. I'm going to do marketing touch point analysis. I'm going to build all of those things. And if you were playing the game for 1 year or even 2 year, you would have done it differently. And as 100%. I hear you listen, and I hear you talk about it now, and I think about the enterprise value that you've driven both for your sponsors and for your executive team, that's a critical element. So I guess another takeaway for CEOs, it's really hard to buck the board when they're pushing you for monthly or quarterly EBITDA. And I had a front row seat for some of those prize fights. And I think that's one of the reasons why you've been successful.
It is, and I think that was your way of saying I'm responsible for you being the CEO of SBI now.
Yeah,
but you're welcome for that.
I believe that was.
Look, it's the downside of being a public company. It's the downside of coming into a situation where you're really under the firing line for the results today. Yeah. Again, I go back to one of the expectations that I established, or I would not have taken the job, was we're going to make investments that won't pay off for 5 to 7 years, meaning you, Mr. Financial Sponsor, will never see a return on this particular investment. The choice is I could have thrown that money to the bottom line, right? Or I could invest in this business thinking like a CEO should, and that is 5, 10, 15 years down the road, what do I need to be investing in today to make sure that this is a viable organization moving forward? I've been very lucky. We've had owners that have bought into that. So between OnCap owners and Leonard Green, and they get it. And it's not about wringing every nickel out of the company just to be able to sell it. You truly have to care about the company and the people and what the company is going to look like 20 years from now. I mean, we're investing, and this has been a constant theme at Caliber, we're investing in things today that I can tell you right now, 5 years minimum payoff. Yeah. But if we pull it off, or when we pull it off, it'll position Caliber to be even a more dominant organization 5, 10, 15 years down the road, and more importantly, a relevant company in our space that far down the road.
So Steve, if I'm a CEO listening to, I'm like, man, so easy for you to say that now, Steve, right? So easy for you to say that now because you're a couple $2 billion and you've had a couple exits. And so now you're this thoughtful, philosophical, altruistic, but I'm trying to make sure that I don't get my ass fired walking out of my second board meeting, right? If I'm a guy driving down the road right now, listening to you and balancing in-year versus out-year relative to, I'm going to go make an acquisition. I'm going to make 2 acquisitions. So how do you give counsel to your peers as they fight that short-term, long-term battle in the context of driving growth?
The couple of things, and don't get me wrong, there were some painful conversations during that time frame. Number one is get your internal team bought in. That's the number one priority. You have to have them on board and bought in, right? Because if they're not 100% on board with the direction you're taking the company, when you go through those tough times, they're going to be ugly conversations. Yeah. But number 2 is top line revenue covers up a lot of sins, right? So there's things that you can do, and that's just a fact. So I'll tell you, in 2010, our margins were flat, right? Even though we grew revenue, if I recall, we grew revenue about probably in the neighborhood of about $40 million. I don't remember the exact numbers. Margins were flat. EBITDA was flat. EBITDA is the measure of all private equity, as you know. Yeah. I could have taken $5 million in 2010 and easily thrown it to the bottom line, but that was the piece that I was using to hire you guys. That was probably the majority of it.
Great decision.
But it was really building that foundation for the company to grow and start to turn it into the company that you wanted it to be. So, look, you have to have some short-term strategies to really kind of juice the revenue engine.
That's the takeaway. Is that the precision with which you said, near-term wise, I can pick up some low-hanging fruit on organic growth by getting a better key account plan.
That's exactly right.
Getting better at inside sales.
Further penetrating the accounts.
Yeah, I've got all this stuff that's like the 6 inches in front of my face. So I got to be out here, but I've got this stuff and I'm going to just out-execute relative to here while I build, because the inorganic muscle you described now, I mean, You didn't have that 7 years ago.
Absolutely.
You've built that over time now, but the interesting takeaway from this segment is the way that you measure the success of an investment. You were measuring inorganic capability that you were building differently than you were measuring organic capability. Organic capability was allowing you to fund what you knew down the road. If I'm really going to build a scalable, sellable asset, which is what Caliber has become, and you guys have all had a great run, you had to do these two things. And Steve, what I often see is a CEO say, this is what I've got to get done in 2018. I'll worry about 19 after I have a really, really good 18 and I take EBITDA from, X to Y.
Absolutely. And you got to be brutally honest. I mean, so when we mapped out, a lot of the $5 million that we invested that year, I would say 85% of it, we did a fairly good job mapping it out for the board and for the owners of what it was, why we were doing it, what we expected to glean from the investment and the time frame. And you don't have to have an investment and a return in 12-month time frame. Some of these things they knew were going to be probably 18, 24 months down the road. But you do need to make sure that you're hitting the targets that you're establishing to justify the investment that you're making in the company. So, you have to have a good relationship with the board and the owners. I mean, it boils down to that.
That's another big takeaway from this.
But you better be brutally honest. If things aren't going well, you tell them they're not going well. Right? And I see that a lot of people like to cover or sugarcoat things. To maybe they're not as bad as they appear to be. And the problem is that no one likes surprises. And if you're not brutally honest with the facts and a surprise comes, a lot of people don't realize how much credibility you lose in that instant in the eyes of the people you need to support you long term. So we were very, very open and honest and candid, and kind of it was an open book. We were kind of going on the journey together. And when you go on the journey together, it means you need transparency, not to the, as we say in Texas, how you butcher the cow, but pretty close to that is what's expected.
So Steve, last question in this segment. It seems like the way you've evaluated, sourced, and measured a potential acquisition has changed over time.
No doubt.
If there were 2 or 3 tenets that you think would be, regardless of industry, that would be advice to CEOs listening relative to the evolution of those components, what would you share with them?
As far as the how we make a decision to do an acquisition?
Well, I mean, the way you articulated the corner strategy, right? You have all these things that are just second nature to you that for many are not.
Yeah, so for us, it's actually, a lot of it is today, it's what it's turned into. It went from, I knew I could make an acquisition, I knew I could double the volume within 12 to 24 months in that facility, and I knew I could eventually get it to run at a same level of profitability that I have today based on my carrier relationships. Because remember, I go back to, I was becoming the trusted advisor for these carriers. I was starting to perform on a consistent level because of my operating platform. So they trusted me, so they supported me either by driving more volume or adding these locations to their DRP. That's what determined whether we did an acquisition. A lot of that was, you didn't have the DRP and you had a lot of capacity that we felt in your center. That's what got you on our radar screen. Today it's just the opposite, right? It's you better be in the right location. You better have, and I'll talk a little bit more about culture later, but a lot of it's the return. If I build a greenfield, I can build it exactly the way I want it, exactly the location I want, and I can start recruiting people 6 months in advance, and I pay a third for that than I pay for an acquisition, right? So greenfield, brownfield's the return to the company and the benefit for our team members and our customers. Nothing can compete with it. The only thing that competes with it is the cost of real estate today. Brownfields aren't that far off. Believe it or not, body shops on dealer locations that we acquire and rebrand, Caliber, and run are not that far off. Acquisitions from a return perspective are the worst. I didn't say bad, I say they're the worst of the 4. And the only reasons that we look to acquisitions and why they're becoming a lower and lower percentage of our overall inorganic growth is people. The other 3 don't get me people. Acquisitions get me people and talent, and that's a key component as to why we do some today.
Very good. Another rich segment. So Steve and I are going to take another break and another drink. And we're going to let Melissa tell you about something else she's got to offer, and then Steve and I are going to come back for our last segment.
Yes, Matt. Well, I have to tell the audience that this is an unsolicited testimonial to Caliber Collision, but I had an amazing experience. To Steve's point, nobody wants to wake up and go to a body shop that day, right? But I had to, and from the top down, before I even realized SBI had an engagement with Caliber Collision, it was an awesome experience that lasted a couple weeks, and it was great. So thank you, Steve, and to your organization for that. But if I'm in the audience, everything that Matt and Steve are discussing right now are resonating with me. So I encourage you to ask us about an interactive workshop with one of our subject matter experts. We were fortunate enough to help Steve with this project, and we'd love to help you as well. To get a feel for what's covered in these workshops, you will go to sbi.tips/2018 workbook. Hopefully you did that after the first segment, like I asked you to. But that's the official workbook of the studio. Here in Dallas, Texas, we'd love to have you down to Dallas. We're just one flight away if you're not located here. And we'd love to have you down and talk more about corporate strategy.
Fantastic. So this is our last segment with Steve, and Steve and I are demonstrating how to orchestrate the right level of inorganic growth to maximize the valuation of your company. And the key is the right level and it's stage appropriate. So, Steve, thinking about in the context of the acquisition, how do you onboard these acquisitions to ensure that you can get the cultural match, you can get the talent match, and with minimal disruption, get them moving the Caliber way?
Yeah. So I chuckle at the minimal disruption comment. If you look at, and I really won't talk about greenfield and brownfields because they're so much easier. I hire a center manager 6 months in advance, or I've promoted one, I've hired the resources, they're training, I've already got the commitments from the carriers, I'm talking to everyone. An acquisition is completely different. Generally in an acquisition, we can't even talk to the new team until the day it closes. Yeah. We can't talk to any carriers until the day it closes, right? And of course, the owner always says, it's all great, nothing will change, gets his check and they're gone, right? Nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah. So if you think about what I said, when we do a typical acquisition is they're operating in an environment where their standards are not as high as Caliber's. It's not a high performance environment on average. Okay. And we're going to double or triple their volume in the next 18 to 24 months. And what ends up happening is we'll close on a Friday. Our team's there when the doors shut on Friday, and they're there all weekend. And over the weekend, we're ripping out all of their systems. We're putting in our systems and really our IT topology. We already have the facilities people in. We're ripping the building to shreds because it's a piece of junk. They haven't invested a nickel in it in the last 15 years. And we don't want, so if you go back to this whole concept about restoring customers to the rhythm of their lives, you know, we have every moment of truth mapped out as a customer goes through the experience. So people think this is an accident and it's a great, nothing's by chance. You don't pull up to a Caliber and find a clean, well-lit parking lot by accident. You don't pull up to Caliber and see that the signage and everything's very, very clear where you go. You don't walk in and smell popcorn by accident. You don't walk up and see the CSR stand and greet you by accident. You don't see them call you by name if you have an appointment by accident. It goes on and on and on. Those are all pieces of the process that we've defined on the customer side. So we need to get that acquisition up to those standards as fast as we can. And the way I describe it, and I hate to describe it this way, it's very violent. It is. I mean, because we're ripping everything to shreds. Yeah. We've put in new systems and processes. You come in Monday, you have your new safety glasses because we mandate you operate in a safe environment. You have your fresh air systems, you have your personal protective equipment. No one's job just stayed the same. And then we have resources we call cast members that are sitting by every single resource to teach you how to do your job that you've been doing for 15 years, the Caliber way over the next 3 weeks. Damn. So our turnover in the first year is very, very high. Oh, I bet. Right? And that's okay. A lot of it's forced because people say, I want nothing to do with this. Yeah. And the ones that want to really become part of a high-performing team with tremendous growth opportunities become very, very, very successful. We spend on average $284,000 post-close to caliberize these facilities, right? So
it's your own verb.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So caliberizing is something. So it is, as I tell people, and we've slow played it. And what we found is new team members get more upset with you when you leave them alone than they do when you come in and you rip the Band-Aid off. Because the longer you leave them alone, they don't feel part of the team. It's us and them. I don't care how much you try and make them part of your organization. It's really us and them. So we rip the Band-Aid off. We turn it upside down. It's a Caliber location within 60 days. We deal with the turnover. And then what we have, Matt, is, and this is another piece that is critically important, to be able to create the Caliber type of culture and ensure you have the people with the core values that align to your corporate core values is we have a 1, 2, 3, and 4.5 day training programs that are all dedicated to introducing you to the culture and your personal development. It has nothing to do with, in most cases, technical development. That's a specialty for your individual role. So Camp Caliber is a 1-day training program. That's when you get introduced for the first time to Caliber's purpose and core values. Every acquisition goes through that, and they can't stand it because they don't know what it is. I'm taking a day out of your life, and I'm making you go through this. I don't care. Everybody in the facility, the techs, the shop helpers, the preppers, the painters, the service advisors, everyone goes through it. By the end of every time we go through this, by the end, they're like, okay, that was kind of cool. It's different. It's kind of weird, a little freaky, but I kind of liked it, And
different's cool, though.
It is, but they start to say, okay, now I'm kind of starting to get what's different about Caliber. Everyone that interfaces with customers goes through a 2-day owner's manual intensive training. And this is where you get your first introduction to our operating manual, our owner's manual as we call it, which really identifies the 10 steps that represent best practices that we expect every center to live by. Guess what? 50% of those are dedicated to the customer. 50% of those are dedicated to the repair of the vehicle. We have a 3-day platinum training that every new leader or prospective leader goes through. And this is really where this whole concept of becoming a servant leader in our industry really starts to take shape and take form. And then we have a 4.5-day leadership in high gear. And that's where it's all pulled together that any center manager and above has gone through that training in Caliber. And this is really where and this is the piece that a lot of people underestimate. This really is where you integrate outside resources and you caliberize them to become Caliber team members. By the time they get through all of that type of training and you have the right type of team members and the right type of leaders, that you don't have to worry about them driving the Caliber way at these local facilities because, look, there was a time I could visit every center every year.
Can't do it anymore.
Not even if I had your private jet, I couldn't do that.
That won't get you to Fort Worth, and we're in Dallas.
You have to create disciples at every level that live and breathe and own that passion and that commitment and scale those. And you're scaling people just like you're scaling your growth platform and everything else. And that's about a $15 million investment that we make that none of our peers do. So you think about what I just said, and you know what the multiples trade in private equity. I could stop that tomorrow, dump it to the bottom line. The problem is we become like everyone else 2 years from now, right? So these are the types of investments you've got to think through. It's more than just a physical integration of assets. It's a personal integration of people into who you are and your culture.
So I want to capture, as Steve and I wrap up, I want to capture a couple of central messages and the way to think through this if you're a CEO and you're thinking about organic versus inorganic. Because Steve mapped the client experience early on and he recognized that the fixing of a car was table stakes and it was about restoring the rhythm of a person's life, and that made the human interaction. So 50% of his business, as he said it, is about people. 50% is about, the shop itself, the performance conditions. When Steve and I first met at Safety Clean, we'd say, hey, got to hire the right people, but I got to put them in the right quote with the right territories, right quotas, right leads. That 50-50 balance in inorganic as a CEO, as you have your strategy, coming out of client experience design where you know what matters, and then all of your strategic items fall underneath that. So I think, Steve, that's a massive takeaway that I think some people, it's even been great to have you back in today to remind me that the connectivity between your client experience and then where you put people, money, and time relative to your investments as a CEO are critical. That's one. Two is your conviction. Your conviction around people and being in the people business with your training and never, ever backing off of that. So for those thinking about inorganic, we always underestimate when you acquire a company what it takes to caliberize them, right? Or whatever action verb that you have if you don't have your own word that Steve does, what that takes. So Steve, it's probably an unfair question, but if there is one or two things that you would give to a peer CEO as he or she thinks about the organic, inorganic debate as they're trying to grow their company, one or two pieces of advice, regardless of industry, what would that be?
All right, I'll give you three.
Okay, even better.
I'm an overachiever.
Over-deliver.
Yeah. And I've touched on all of these. Number one is build your platform for growth and scaling in advance of doing it, period.
Okay.
And that includes adding the resources and what you need.
Okay.
Number two is on the small acquisitions, rip the Band-Aid off. Rip the Band-Aid off, and speed is your friend. And dealing with the collateral damage early that creates is a rounding error compared to the benefits it has long term. And the third piece that I've learned, which we really haven't talked about, but it's critically important, acquisitions of any size, as a CEO, spend as much time evaluating the cultural fit as you do the financial benefits of that acquisition. I've seen so many larger acquisitions fail miserably for the lack of fit on a culture. From a cultural perspective, there's not a fit, and people underestimate the impact, the negative impact that will actually have of the success of integrating that business into yours as well. So there's three, and look, I've got the scars on my back from all three of these things. So if I was talking to someone, those would be the three I'd walk away with.
The point I would finish you with relative to culture, I think oftentimes when I talk to sales leaders who are getting ready to integrate a company and they think, oh, now I have these products and these channel partners and access to these customers, what they don't think about is that last one you spoke about, and they're running so hard to sell the new stuff in the bag that they're shattering glass, and it's going to take them 2x as long to repair that. It's a great reminder. So, Steve, can't thank you enough, man. Great
Always
to see
a pleasure.
you. Great to thanks for coming by in person.
Can't wait for the next engagement.
On behalf of the SBI community, I appreciate you tuning in, and a big thanks to Steve and the team over at Caliber. They really are one heck of a success story. And I know you all have a choice on where you put your eyes and ears for 30 minutes and listen. So thanks for tuning in. Melissa, I think you have one final thing to share.
Yes, I do. And thank you, Steve. So wise. Appreciate you sharing with our community. And I invite those of you watching and listening to be a part of the SBI community. We feature just about 100 guests per year, and we don't know everybody. So sometimes we need some help sourcing guests. So if you have a compelling story to share in the world of B2B sales and marketing, please reach out to me. You can do so by going to our website at salesbenchmarkindex.com, or the easier route, just find me on LinkedIn. That's all I got. Thank
Fantastic.
you, gentlemen.
All right, everybody. We hope you enjoyed the show, and as always, I wish you the best of luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center, our team, or to schedule a workshop, please visit salesbenchmarkindex.com.